Hi, welcome. My name is Andreka Kokliat, and I am here to provide some reality architecture, lifestyle design for you. And the goal is for you to invest in you, your happiness, and your future. So, and my goal is for this to be for people who are highly sensitive, and I am creating what I'm calling new rules of power for highly sensitive people. And the goal of this is to find the easiest actions that produce the most valuable, meaningful, and powerful results, and fast. So, and the goal is to learn how to be a hard target. And what I realized today in preparing for this presentation, it's basically how to be an apex predator. And I want to encourage you to stay till the end, where there's a big reveal about where the stealth bullies and predators most commonly lurk. And those with post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress response already know the answer to that. But again, this is the Predator Whisperer. My name is Andreka Kokliat, and I am a coach for healthy boundaries for highly sensitive people, survivors of narcissistic abuse, and autoimmune PTSD and PTSR, post-traumatic stress response. You can find me at My Post-Traumatic Growth on YStamp and on Facebook. And please know the information here is for informational purposes, entertainment purposes. And if you're ill or struggling, you need to find a trusted care provider to help you. So first of all, I want to welcome you. We are blessed you are here. And there's going to be a quiz at the end of this presentation. It's going to be about 30 minutes. So I want to encourage you to get whatever you need, pen, your journal, or your diary, a cup of tea, take a quick bathroom break, or even, maybe if there's a technical glitch, just be patient with me, just like you've seen right now. So I ask pardon for any technical problems that may occur. So who is Andreka? I have done a variety of classes and workshops over the past 20 years, and I've been told that I've given one of the best classes, that I make a big difference, I'm inspiring, an excellent instructor, outstanding and supportive. I have a variety of credentials. I'm a certified iridologist, a feng shui practitioner, fermentationist, a body worker, and I was one of the 200 people in Chris Kresser's launch of his beta testing of his Adapt Academy. I also have clairvoyant certification and am a minister through the Church of Natural Grace. And I also host the Functional Forum here in Missoula every month. So feel free to find me on the internet through My Post-Traumatic Growth on Facebook or the landing page. Send me your email and I can notify you when my next Functional Forum is, when my future workshops will be, and when my next show on MCAT will be. So I have been listening to a lot of literature, and something kind of gelled for me. I was listening to audiobooks about Plato, Orwell's 1984, and right now I'm listening to an audio version of Bleak House by Charles Dickens. And I'm realizing we're living in a dystopia. And something that validates this is a very well-renowned post-traumatic stress disorder therapist, Peter Levine, says trauma is commonplace. So what is the purpose of the Predator Whisperer? The goal is to turn weaknesses and adversity into power and value, to finding meaning and empowerment. So the goal of the next 25 minutes is going to be brainstorming, solution focused, realistic, and ultimately to replace people pleasing with representing your own interests. And so I want to talk about real estate. Our human bodies are actual real estate, and there's big industries, growth industries that are based on that are depending on us being sick. As in my previous shows here at MCAT, I've mentioned how somebody with cancer is worth $500,000. Autistic children are worth $3 million to the medical industry. That's insurance, pharmacies, or the big pharma, and of course medicine. And the CDC has 21 patents of vaccines. The CDC is a private organization. It's not a government organization. And so there's just a lot of kind of confusion about who's representing our interests, and it's not them. And so my goal here is to encourage people to become informed, to name what's going on, and to make the choices that they want for their health. And and there was an interesting concept that I read in a book where some big oil company, some big petroleum company was tired of paying $1 million for what was called a no-dumb drill. Or dumb drills, and so they would spend $1 million drilling for oil, and there'd be no oil, and so they were tired of wasting that much money. It was just a common thing in the industry that they would waste millions of dollars until they had one strike. And so that is my goal for all those that are watching and following my work, is that we can be this healthy person that doesn't have to be a casualty, that we don't have to spend $1 million to recover our health. Like health is our only option, and that is what I'm trying to promote, is that health is the option. We are meant to be healthy, and it seems to me, kind of back to the dystopia thing, we are being programmed to accept Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity, cancer, autism. We're being brainwashed to accept that as the norm. And that is dis-ease, that is dysbiosis, it's imbalance. Humans are supposed to be healthy, and I want to encourage people to expect that, demand it, and own it. So, what might be your goals, like soul-nourishing goals for yourself? Do you want to feel safer, more confident, have more energy, have more healthy habits, behaviors, handle stress better? And so I have the word key real estate here, and I went to a real estate talk, and one of the takeaways that I found most valuable is what this person said was, the most valuable real estate is the 4 inches between our ears. So our brain, our mind, is our most valuable real estate. And so I'm going to come back to that. So for those who kind of lose their sovereignty, lose control of that real estate, and it's basically it's almost like a concept. I mean, our body is the reality, and yet, your personality, your soul is this ineffable, intangible thing. However, it's true. I mean, it's there. It's you. I mean, that your self is not just the molecules of your cells, or at least some people would. So my observation in my research is that people who are more likely to have prolonged untreated PTSD or PTSR, post-traumatic stress response tend to be people without options, without access to economic freedom, basically. So for those who have PTSR, and I want to explain. So PTSR, post-traumatic stress response, is just what it describes. When somebody is put in a situation beyond their capacity to cope, they have a response. They are responding to trauma. And that is not a defect of their character or their biology. If you did a placebo-controlled, double-blind, peer-reviewed study about that, which that Stanford test is called the Lucifer complex or something like that. That was an example. You put anybody in a horrible traumatic situation, and the people in power become malignant, toxic, evil, demonic beings, and the victims become victimized and traumatized. So, so my point is, though, that people without options tend to sustain post-traumatic injury, post-traumatic stress response, and chronic disease often can follow. And of course, I'm painting in broad strokes. This is just my observation, and I'm presenting this information to anybody who might find it helpful. So what are the effects of strain? So once in a while, you know, an average person, sometimes things get a bit much and you find yourself with headaches, or you're clenching your teeth, or your sleep is disrupted, or your digestion's disrupted, or you're not eating right, you're eating too much or too little, or you're just feeling a lot of muscle tension all the time, or you're having infections, you get sick a lot, or you're interacting with people gets off, you're not socializing, or maybe even you're being manic. So that, you know, so everybody experiences some strain, and however, when it becomes a way of life, that is an issue. So why bother learning about the predator whisperer, or, you know, why bother being informed about this? People who are abandoned into prolonged traumatic, chronic traumatic situations, and when they sustain post-traumatic stress response, there's a high mortality, up to about 45% mortality. And so when somebody is driven to early death, I mean, the leading up to that point, there's economic effects in their lives, and it also affects their family. It hinders their immediate family, and it also hinders their community. Whenever anybody is depleted and distressed, that takes a toll. And the thing is that growth and healing from post-traumatic stress response, it is possible, and it is doable, it's realistic, and it is our birthright. We really should be striving to heal. So for those who may see themselves as possible experiencing this, you know, do you feel that you're anxious, sick and tired, in a lot of pain, disrupted sleep, feel overwhelmed or confused, can't think clearly, self-doubt, low self-confidence, low self-esteem? Well, you're in the right place. And the thing to keep in mind is, like, we just assume it's easy, kind of the paradigm we're in is that, you know, if you physically don't have, you know, a gash in your body, or you don't have a broken bone, or, you know, you don't have like cancer, like you're considered healthy. But health has to do not only with our physical side. It's also mental and social. So the question that I'm asking is, like, are we supposed to be suffering and sick, or are we, or is health normal? And my point is that health is normal, and we just need to be able to identify where we might be sabotaging ourselves or abandoning ourselves. And it all comes down to, once again, that mental real estate, our mindset. And according to survival theory, like, the most important thing, what we need most of, is a positive mindset. And my goal in talking to those with post-traumatic stress response is not to be like, oh, be happy, oh, you shouldn't think negatively. My actual goal in this discussion is that when we have malignant, toxic people in our lives that are obstacles, they do interfere with like a natural positive attitude, or they don't automatically, but when somebody is a big influence and they're malignant people, that does make it difficult. However, ground zero, what we're trying to get to is a positive attitude, and there are things that help, that lend to a positive attitude. And so we have basic human needs, food, clothing, shelter, and also interacting with other people, a sense of connection with other people. One of the latest statistics is somebody who's isolated that's equal to somebody smoking 11 cigarettes a day. And also there's attachment disorders where people are being rejected by their loved ones, and according to latest statistics, being rejected is 20 times worse than the death of a loved one. And I'm going to go into what rejection can look like in terms of listening, because rejection isn't just, I don't like you, Joe, or whatever. Rejection is demonstrated in the little moments of our interactions with our friends and family and associates. So I want to talk about meaningful systems. And meaning is something I want to distinguish, because I was reading the book Power versus Force by, I forget, last name is Hawkins, and he was saying how power is meaningful. Power sustains, power nourishes. We get our electrical outlets, we get power from our outlet. We don't get force from our outlet. Who uses force? What is force? And I think that's a really interesting subliminal thing to explore. So anyways, back to meaningful systems. It has to do with communication, which allows for connection. We need to be able to express feelings and to feel encouraged to express our natural feelings. Also, that there's explicit rules. And this actually connects to game theory, maybe not game theory, but gamification. The reason why video games are so popular is because there's explicit rules, there's rewarding feedback, there's choice, there's freedom, and there's clear attainment of goals. So that gamification, those qualities of gamification are healthy, and that's why people like games, like video games or tabletop games or whatever. And this applies to meaningful systems. Like games are kind of like the microcosm of what a meaningful, healthy culture or society is. So meaningful systems have a respect for individuation. Your freedom is valued. It's open-minded. New traditions can be created. There's a pleasant atmosphere. It allows for independence. There's trust and love that flourishes, and basically there's healthy people. So I want to go back to rejection. So the opposite of rejection is connection. And what's one way to connect? It's to listen. And according to something I read, the mother of relating is listening. So what is listening appear to be? So so if you're talking with somebody that's interested, in an exaggerated way, think about people who are in love. There's like there's a really exaggerated expression of interest, or there can be. And ideally, somebody mirrors what you have just said, so you know that you guys are on the same page. There's indications like body language indications or verbal indications that you're understanding the meaning of what's being said, the sentiment. People remember what you've said, they interpret accurately what you've said, they elaborate on it, and they respond ultimately to your questions or to your requests. So that's what listening can look like, and that's kind of like the technology of relating or connecting. So this is the spectrum of rejection and listening. So it's going from rejection to listening. So rejection is evasion. It's being ignored. So just, when have you been ignored? When have you been evaded, your requests or your needs evaded? And then an improvement on that would be interruption. So you begin to say something and then you're interrupted. Then a little bit better, an improvement of that is when somebody, at least they disapprove. So you've actually been able to say, I dislike meat and I love meat. I'm just using it as an example. But where the person allows you to have a voice, and then they disapprove. And then the next step is contradiction. So instead of them disapproving that you don't like meat, they'll contradict you, and they'll be like, no, you like meat. So that things are getting a little bit better. Then when there's a perfunctory recognition, so when the person's just like, whatever you said, then implicit recognition and changing the topic. So where the person's like, oh, I hear you. You say you don't like meat, and so how about the Mets? So they change the topic. So things are getting better when there's acknowledgement with room for communication exchange. So where the person's like, you don't like meat, and there's no disapproval, there's no changing of the topic. And then when they pursue the topic, now we're really on a roll. So they say, tell me more about you're not liking this or that. Then when there's confirmation, so you really don't like meat. And then fully shared feeling and experience. So maybe that person that you're talking with would be like, well, let me tell you about when I was visiting this grass-fed, cattle farm, and it was wide open pasture, and there was all these grass-fed steer, and there were flowers and bee hives, and it was just like the tilth was amazing, and that's what I saw when so that's them having a fully shared experience. So, you're doing really great with listening and connection and exchange. And then there's consistent behavior and upon future follow-up. So where that conversation or that exchange, it becomes the repertoire, becomes kind of the building block and the glue of your relation, just like it's part of your history that is full disclosure. So now we're going to talk about stealth predators, and so I'm kind of making this up as I go along, because the point, like I started off with, the goal of this is to prevent from being an easy target, and I guess in military term, it's to become a hard target. And I just wanted to kind of, what's the opposite of target? The opposite of target is the hunter, the predator. So, and what's the ultimate predator? It's the apex predator. So my goal is to impart how to be an apex predator that is coming from power, that's coming from meaning, and again, power is a life-giving, contributing source, rather than the stealth, toxic, narcissistic predator that's forcing itself on others. So what might that look like? What's a toxic person like? When has anybody ever been toxic or malignant, kind of made you sick, or made you kind of feel a little or very disturbed? You come home from work or come home, or all you talk about is this distressing person or this distressing event on your personal time, when you're supposed to be relaxing, when you're supposed to be like enjoying your family or your friends. Instead, you're talking about this horrible person. So, and when does that happen? Think about when that's happened to you. So what does toxic behavior look like? Could it be personal insults, invading your personal space? In a like kind of like you don't know this person and they're kind of like thinking that they can kind of touch you or get really close to you, or kind of underhanded, kind of sneaky status slaps, like make little kind of jabby comments, facial expressions, disapproval with something that you're working on. Maybe you haven't mastered it. Kind of shaming you in public, making snide comments or rude comments, or talking about you even maybe behind your back, rude interruptions, threats, intimidation, sarcastic, passive insults, treating you as if you were invisible, dirty looks, two-faced attacks. And so let's say you're having some difficulties, or let's say you have some needs. Forms of toxic negligence. So, and what I'm talking about is kind of the stealth, more hidden types of predators, because we all know violent people or whatever. War is it's toxic. So there's domestic abuse or whatever. We know like the overt, in your face predator, and what I'm talking about are the kind of sneaky, institutionalized predators who are trying to make their social leverage, the work they do, the job they have, their status, they're trying to kind of hide behind that, like the moral, like the benefit that they supposedly offer, when in reality they're just exploiting the whole situation for their benefit. So toxic forms of negligence would be being glib or minimizing your needs, denying the seriousness of your concerns, becoming angry or irritable when reference is made to the situation, bamboozling you, so just like kind of blindsiding you, preventing or obfuscation of access to information. So obfuscation is kind of like hiding things, like piling up, like overwhelming you with information, or like trying to make it harder for you to see, pressuring you to act against your own interests. And what I find with toxic people is they'll pressure you to respond on their time frame, and maybe you need to have 7 times that time frame. Like maybe somebody wants you to respond in 24 hours and you need a week. When they put you down, that's another use of force and control. And manipulation. And this one is definitely, like, this one probably should be the biggest one, and it probably could you take up more time. But manipulation by being nice to you, charming you, giving you gifts, like obliging you, like kind of forcing you to take gifts and whatnot. Also, in terms of manipulation, what I have found is compensatory entitlement. So I have found that there will be people who have disabilities that think that they get to use force on you. Whether they're more physically disabled or what, but compensatory entitlement, where they feel entitled to take more resources, more whatever, because they're that much more wounded or disabled or deserving. And I am finding that there's a compensatory entitlement, like kind of a narcissism, that can occur even among the demographic of people who may be considered otherwise vulnerable. So something I do want to say is that, and it's going to come out towards the end as well, so maybe I'll save it towards the end. So when I'm talking about, and I just want to make sure it's clear, stealth predators are using force, which is different, like I said, than power. Power is a nourishing, like empowering, life-giving, creative thing. Whereas force is limited. It's got like inertia in it, and force is parasitic, or force is violent, as we know, and it fails to be creative. It fails to be soul nourishing, despite what one of our favorite movies. I suggest you do some looking at it. So predators are operating out of meaninglessness when they are in using force, because force is this limited kind of mechanical and uninspired. Force is uninspired. Force fails to be creative. And when one is operating out of meaninglessness, that means that, so these toxic people are unable to be creative themselves. They're unable to contribute to society outside of this paradigm of force. And the problem, while they may think that they're just being a helpful cog in the machine, is that the malignant narcissist, the stealth predator, is operating with their own interests at heart. And when somebody is being selfish and only about expediency rather than the human souls that are coming to them for help, that is a problem. And unfortunately, not only are they focusing on expediency and their convenience, there are some malignant narcissists, and maybe many or all, that are enjoying the misery and suffering that they are causing. They feed off of it. And they feed off of the suffering of others because they are unable, they are devoid of power. They are devoid of the creative source. They are operating only out of force, which is like an external identify. You know, they're trying to get something from outside of themselves because they haven't cultivated meaning within themselves. So trauma, betrayal, trauma. So there's situations where people have been traumatized. A war happens, or a tsunami, or somebody dies. So there's that kind of one-time deal, and then there's chronic trauma, described just like prolonged abuse. And then there's trauma betrayal trauma, which makes it's more complex. Like there's also the term complex PTSD. So trauma betrayal trauma is when the trusted agents of the public good exacerbate the person's trauma. So let's say there's an accident or a crime, violent crime, and either the EMT or the police officer or the doctor or the priest or whatever, they traumatize the person. They do all the things that I described before. They ignore, they minimize, they insult the person who's come to them for help. So that's trauma betrayal trauma, and that makes the post-traumatic stress response that much more complicated. And the grieving process then can become complicated grief. And before we go into that, I just want to, I want to do the reveal of who the stealth predators are. So we know who the obvious stealth predator is, like we were saying, like sorry about my little technical glitch here. I'm just going to stick with that. So we know obvious people who are doing obvious violence, but then there's the folks that like security, that like an easy job, that like to control, that like vulnerable targets, that like those who will never speak back, that will never talk back, those who have low self-esteem. So there are people who like that kind of control, that like to master, to think that they're the master of people's lives, that they know better than these vulnerable people do. And there are people who like to cause other people's misery, that like to tell them off, like kind of enjoy sticking that knife in of disappointment, frequently disappoint you, drop the ball, like fail to be reliable to you, and with impunity, lacking any conscience. That's what I'm talking about. So there's people who are devoid of a conscience that gravitate to jobs with where they can have control and formal authority over vulnerable people who have low self-esteem and who are too polite for their own good. And I want to refer to this book called Who's Pulling Your Strings? And it's by Harriet Baker, I think. And so the people who are more vulnerable to this situation are people who are afraid of negative emotions in themselves. They're also afraid of triggering a negative emotion in others. There are people who are naive, that have the inability to say no, that are addicted to other people's approval. They have low self-esteem, and we are also practicing self-deception, because we're thinking, oh, we should be nice people rather than mature adults. And I do think like that's why I kind of like the idea of being an apex predator, because normally I would never think of myself as a predator, but I want to be a hard target, and so I want to be a powerful predator rather than a predator force. And further, her book says that there's self-destructive consciousness. So people who have a tendency to be victims maybe kind of have a self-destructive approach to themselves. They're externally identified, approval-seeking, and they can isolate themselves. They can rationalize, oh, well, that person has a right to be mean to me, or they can rationalize, it's too much trouble. We can also be emotionally immature. We just may need to practice going outside of our comfort zone. We may be too altruistic, and again, that may be a question of our motives. Maybe we're being like too, like we're thinking being spiritual is more worth it than our practical physical well-being, and you know, does that really help? You know, to like compromise our everything, you know, for our spirituality. I mean, I can understand on some levels, but anyways, loneliness can be a factor of why we will compromise ourselves, why we abandon ourselves, and also we can be too impressionable. So those are her lists. I do think there's biological components as well. So anyways, the trustworthy agents of the public good can be a very likely place for stealth predators to exist. So there is post-traumatic growth, and it really is about finding meaning in the trauma and being able to reframe yourself of what you learned, and rebuild yourself and redefine yourself as well. And again, so that game mentality, to gamify things, it has to do with a clear goal, clear rules, where there's meaningful feedback, and where there's voluntary participation, there's freedom, and where there's consent, mutual consent, which is, you know, it's the opposite of a toxic relationship. So I want to do a quick quiz. So you have your journal and your pen, and hopefully you're seated comfortably. What are the 3 things you want to take away from this? Like off the top of my head, I do think our real estate inside our head is really valuable. That was your mind, you know, the 4 inches between your ears is highly valuable. Also, that your biology, your body, is real estate. It's regarded as real estate by the AMA, the FDA, the CDC. They depend on you being sick. You make them money when you have Alzheimer's, when you have autism, or your kid has autism. I mean, it's like $3 million. It's a lucrative industry. And there are people who do think that they are entitled, like that that people being sick is some type of sacrifice, like some valid sacrifice. People with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So your being sick is something that that medicine, pharmacy, the big pharma, farming, agriculture, they are aiming for you to be ill, because you're preoccupied, you're compliant, you make them money, you die early, they get money they get to cash in on a trust when you die. So it really all works for them. And I want to encourage people to be a rebel and to be healthy. It is your birthright, and it is possible to be healthy. And so yeah, what are your 3 things that you're gonna focus on? It could be, you know, learning more about this topic, or, you know, going for walks in nature, But whatever it is, I hope you wrote down, you know, short-term goals or even long-term objectives. And so in the future, you can find me on Facebook or YouTube or my landing page at WiseStamp under my post-traumatic growth. And leave me your email. You can email me at my Gmail account, Andreka, A-N-D-R-E, last name C-O-K-L-Y-A-T, at Gmail. And I could put you on my mailing list, sorry. And I will keep you posted about my functional forums, my next show on MCAT, and other events I'm going to have. And I'm going to be focusing on a happiness workshop, happiness for highly sensitive people in the future. So contact me, and I'm going to be working on my beta test, so I'm going to have a kind of a lower cost thing. So thank you so much for your time, and may you and we all be healed, freed, and blessed in our walk. We are here to be cherished and whole, and it's happening. So I'm grateful for your time, and I look forward to seeing you at a future event of mine or having you as a viewer next time. So I think we'll end the show at that point. So sending all the best.